So after understanding what goes on into cloud computing generally, in terms of the models available, when we say cloud, we've talked about the public cloud, and we gave examples of them, which are the commercial public cloud providers that we know: Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, DigitalOcean, Heroku, a host of others. We talked about the private cloud. We said any organization that has their own data center where they have invested into these IT infrastructures. So that will be a cloud, private cloud, because they own and operate it. Then we talked about the hybrid, in which they don't continue to invest in additional hardware infrastructure into their private cloud, rather they scale into the public. So just to have a benefit of both, because of course there could be some downside to each of these. So like hybrid is kind of leveraging the positives of owning a private data center and the positives of having solutions or services in the commercial cloud. Then we talked about the services that these cloud providers gives to their potential customers. We said infrastructure as a service, in which case we give example of our virtual machines, like the very best example everybody will talk about under infrastructure as a service. So we said in infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider would set up a data center, put servers together, network them together, the storage, put them together, and then virtualize the servers. So you can now come to say, hey, I need to provision a server in your data center, meaning a virtual server, virtual machine, so to say. So now with infrastructure as a service, you have the flexibility, or you have that access to bring in your own operating system, or you can purchase one from them, but you are responsible for managing the operating system that your server runs. Then you manage whatever dependencies your application need, in addition to writing the programming codes for your application and hosting your application on the server. So basically, you are managing the entire IT lifecycle, except that you then have to invest in your own IT infrastructure. You just have to rent a server from a company. You rent a server, then you come with your own operating system, or you buy one from them, put in your dependencies for your applications to run, put in your programming codes for your application, and then of course your application, you expose it to the public that needs to use them. So that's infrastructure as a service. So we give an example of your virtual servers, your virtual networks, and the storage. Then in platform as a service, I mentioned that you only have to worry about designing your application programming codes. Whatever programming language you want to write, you write your application in, you only worry about your programming. And then you only ship your code into the platform that the cloud provider is going to give you when you request for one. So basically, they will manage the servers right from the computing system, the storage, the network, then the operating system, and the dependencies that your programming language needs. The programming language you have chosen to write your code, to write your application in, they also give you the dependencies. So I said, for example, if you have written a Java-based application, so you have written some Java codes, you just ask from your cloud provider, I need a server that runs maybe Red Hat Linux operating system, and I need the server to have maybe 6 CPU with 12 GB of memory, and they provide that to you, and you only put in your Java application codes into it, and your application is ready. So you are responsible for managing your code and the application interface. So, but you don't have to worry about operating system, servers, downward. Your cloud provider manages that for you. And in the software as a service, you are only subscribing to a software plan, a software that is already built and available on the internet. You only subscribe to a plan and you log in into the software to enjoy, the applications. So I give example of, okay, for platform as a service, I give example of Azure Web Service. Azure Web Service, yeah, or service app services or web services. I think they do have some other that, but based on the innovation, there are some other things that will be struggling to categorize either on the infrastructure or on the platform. For example, in modern times, we use a Kubernetes to run application workload. So can we now say Kubernetes is infrastructure as a service or platform as a service? But we do have it, like you can have Kubernetes in the one you set up the cluster yourself. So in that case, it will be infrastructure as a service. But all of these commercial cloud provider offers managed Kubernetes services. So in the case of Azure, they have Azure Kubernetes service, in which you don't manage the infrastructure yourself. So it will not be a platform as a service in that case. So I guess Kubernetes is probably outside the scope of a beginner, so to say. Then for software as a service, I give example of Office Online, Office 365. Basically in it, for example, if you can still see my screen, I just log in into Office 365 and you see I have Outlook, I have Teams, I have Word, I have Excel, a lot of other applications, PowerPoint one, in which if I actually need all of these applications, I may have to purchase a software with a software license and then install the executable on my PC before I can access these applications. But I don't have to do that again. I can just come to office365.com, put in my username and password, and then I have access. So I can send email from here if I want. Right now, I'm using Teams on the web. I don't have to install Teams on my PC. I can format documents. I can do some Excel sheets if I want online. So not necessarily having to install them on my PC. So which means these days I can even free my PC of a whole lot of things. I don't have to plug with a lot of data because I don't even need some of these applications installed on my PC because I can access them on the internet. So that's an example of software as a service. And I also gave an example of Netflix. You don't necessarily have to, back in the days, if you need to watch a movie, maybe you get a hard disk or a flash drive, you copy from a friend's PC, you go to your own PC, put it there, and then you can watch. But now you don't have to do that. Or probably you have to go to a cinema. But now you can just go to netflix.com and then you can, subscribe to their service and you can watch any movie you want. I think they even have more movies in the archive than any cinema on had. So that's example of software as a service. A whole lot of software solutions are there as well that we can talk about. So now those are like general to all cloud providers, whether in the private cloud or the public cloud. Now, focusing on Azure, we'll now be looking at the core services that Azure offers their customers. So if you're looking to, subscribe to Azure's services, then you most likely are going to choose from some of the services we're talking about. Or as you are learning to be a cloud practitioner, these services are the services you either want to sell to a customer, or if you work for an organization, these services are what you are going to be managing for them. So, but before that, let's look into architectural components of Azure, the way Azure designs their data centers. Presently, I think, if my memory serves me properly, Azure has data centers in more than 50 countries in the world, 50 to 60, if I can remember correctly, and they have more than 140 data centers. So like in the US alone, they segment US into US West, US Central, East US, South Central. So in each of these regions, they built data centers there, such that clients, potential customers needing to rent the servers can choose from which one is closer to them. Then they built in every other country. They have in the UK, they have in Germany, they have in China, they have in South Africa, they have in UAE, they have in Australia, like that. So what Microsoft do, in all of this now, they have to ensure that they give their customers high availability, because you cannot, be subscribing to a cloud service and then you have it still not running 24/7. So what they do is that they build some data centers into what they call availability zones, such that two data centers can be paired together. In the sense that if you have your services running in one data center, if anything happens, case of natural disaster or maybe electrical failure, you can fall back to a secondary region or a secondary data center. So I think we would explore some of those later. So, but the concept here is just talking about the regions. Regions meaning locations where Microsoft have data centers. Then the availability zones, meaning regions that have backup regions, such that if you have your services running in region A, if anything happens, you have a backup region that Microsoft can fail over to and then keep your services running. Then that's from the level of the physical data center they built. And all of these physical data centers are, networked together with fiber optic cables, such that, you can provision anywhere you want. Outside that, from the physical discussion, now from the software way of managing the data center. Once they have built the data center, we said you don't necessarily need to go to the data center physically to access provisioning virtual machines or network or uploading your codes for your application. So how do you now access the data center? Then they have built a web portal. So the web portal, you just go into the web portal, sign in, subscribe to an account, and then you can begin to provision your resources. So now their portal is at the website is at portal.azure.com. Can you still see my screen? You can still see my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. So basically, you can go to. Okay, I don't want to use this as I'm incognito here. Basically, want to do it. Portal.azure.com. So this is a website. If you come here, basically, it's going to ask you to sign in. So this is how the portal looks like for the first time. So in the portal, you can now interact with Azure Data Center by provisioning whatever you want to provision. So if I want a virtual machine, then I can see the icon, I can click, then I can continue. But before I can do any of this service, I need to have a subscription. So right now, this is saying if I don't have a subscription, I can start with a free trial. So in the free trial, they give you $200 credit to provision resources and then to learn. Of course, they have some packages for students. So usually this is how you interact with the Azure. So outside interacting with Azure from the portal, you can still have some programmatic way. Like you don't want to, come to the GUI, you want to rather send in commands to provision the resources you want. You want to create virtual machine, you can send in commands. You want to create a network, you can send in commands. You want to create a storage account, you can send in commands. You want to deploy your code into a platform. So request for a platform, send in commands, deploy your code into the platform, you do it with command. That's another way of interacting with Azure. So we'll get there as we progress. So now you need a subscription, like we've said, you need a subscription before you can provision any Azure resource. After you have a subscription, then you need, for every resource you want to create in Azure, you need to have a resource group. So resource group is like a logical container for arranging your resources. For example, you work for an organization and they have servers being used by different departments of the organization. So you might want to probably organize the servers used by different departments into different resource groups for easier management, so that you can manage them easily. So you can have resource group A, maybe for accounting department. So any server you provision in resource group A maybe would be servers that will be used by colleagues from the accounting department. Resource group B, maybe from those in would host servers used by those in marketing department, like that. So generally, for every resource you need to create in Azure, you need to have a resource group. Resource group is just a logical container. See it as a shelf, as a bookshelf, where you arrange your books. So it's not a core component, but you need to have it to arrange your resources. Now, the core resources are like the exact thing we really need to run our applications in the cloud. So we need the compute, we need the network, we need the storage, we need the databases. So we'll see more down. So yeah, I think I talked about these architectural components, regions and region pairs, blah, 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 availabilities also. So yeah, I think if you can still see this clearly, 60 plus regions in over 140 countries of the world. I think they would have, had more. This is probably last year. I mean, this documentation is probably last year. Some of the regions they are building, they might have completed and, launched them into availability. So with this, you can see this is the world map, and then you can see every blue dot represents a data center. I mean, represent a region or a location where they have a data center. So the ones with a white dot inside the blue dot represents where they have a region pair for high availability. I said it's possible to have a primary region and secondary region. If something happens in the primary region, you can fail over to secondary region. So the ones that are paired are the ones with the white dot inside. Then, of course, the ones with the dotted line to form the circle are regions they announced that they want to build data center. So if this is clear enough for you, let me see if I can zoom. I hope this is, can you see a bit more? Is it clear? Can you see my screen a bit more? Hello, guys? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Just need to be sure that you guys are following.
Mute. Yeah, we can see the screen.
Okay. So yeah, you can see in the America region, they have data center in all of these countries divided into region. In Canada, US, Mexico, okay, they are planning to build in Mexico. maybe they might have completed it now, because this is just as at the time of this documentation. So in the European region, they have all of this. So in the East Asia or Southeast Asia, and I mean East Asia, yeah, they have all of this. In the Australia, they have here. Then in Africa, they have here in South Africa. In the Gulf, Middle East Gulf, they have in these areas. Then of course they have in Brazil. So these are, so meaning you are not restricted to provision resources, whether virtual machine or storage, or you want to host your application. You are not restricted to deploying it in a specific, any specific region. You can deploy anywhere you want in all of these regions. But what informs your choice of which location to choose would be dependent on where your subscribers are. I mean, the kind of services you are rendering and where you have the most of your subscribers. But of course, they still have some other services to localize data in case maybe you have a worldwide network, you have a worldwide subscriber base. So we'll get to some of these services. Okay, so yeah, region pairs. They showed regions where you have primary, secondary region. So this is like how Microsoft built their data centers. So at least they have 300 miles of separation, automatic replication for some services, region recovery in the event of outage. So like you have North Central US, then you have a paired region in South Central US. So if you provision any resource here, and then you go for the high availability or availability zones, if anything happens in North Central, they can fail over your services to South Central US, and then your services are, not affected as such. East US and West US paired together, West US 2 and West Central US, like this, like this, like this. So this is how they try to, give high availability to their customers. So in the availability options that Azure renders, if you run a single virtual machine for your, if you create a single virtual machine, Azure promises SLA of 99.9%, provided that your virtual machine is running a premium storage. Like the disk for your virtual machine is a premium disk. Normally in Azure, they have like 3 types of disk. They have a standard disk, standard HDD disk, which is made of, your normal magnetic tape drive disk. Then you have a standard SSD disk. It's an SSD, a solid state drive, but the charging model is like that of HDD. Then they have a premium SSD, which is also a solid state drive, but with a premium performance. So if you have such virtual machine, then you have 99.9% of availability. So, but for higher availability, then you want to plan for redundancy. So you want to create more than one virtual machine for your services. So if you create more than one virtual machine, then you have 99.99% of SLA. So how you have this is that in a single data center, you can have more than one virtual machine that will be spread across the data center for you. But if you want a better availability, then you can go to multi-region high availability options. So where you can enjoy, failover, such that if anything happens, for example, now, if you run only one virtual machine, it is running inside just one node in the rack. If anything happens, maybe there's electrical power trip off, or maybe due to cooling system failure, that rack failed. It means your server will go down, and you won't have any choice until Microsoft engineers physically go to the data center to intervene before your server comes up again. But if you have more than one virtual machine running and you put it in availability zone, they will spread your virtual machines in more than one cluster inside the same data center. You know, like I said, in the data center, servers are basically arranged into racks, racks are arranged into clusters, and clusters, multiple clusters made up the data center. So if you have more than one virtual machine now, Microsoft will ensure that your virtual machines are not all kept in the same rack or in the same cluster. So maybe one of your virtual machine is in cluster A, another one will be in cluster B. So the clusters take power source and cooling source from the same unit. So if cluster A fails, cluster B is there running because the electrical source are not the same. So you have a better availability option like that. So your SLA increases. But if you now go to multi-region such that you have a primary region and secondary region, like if you deploy into one of these regions, so if, let's say we don't want it to happen, but let's say we have flooding or typhoon or any natural disaster that affected the whole of North Central data center, we can have the opportunity of failing over to South Central US while Microsoft continue working on this. So which means you have resilience against an entire data center failure because you have a secondary data center where you can fall over to. So this, a kind of how Azure ensures they are giving high availability to their customers. So you as a cloud professional, whether you are in the consulting capacity or you are managing for an organization or you want to sell Azure services to an organization now. So these are some of the things you factor in to them when you want to probably advise or, recommend a solution. You have to look into, okay, how, if you are looking for high availability, we have to create these services in more than one region. Or if we cannot afford to put it in more than one region, we can have it in more than one cluster in the same data center. Like these are some of the concepts you have to bring into your discussion to show your understanding of the solution you are preferring. So of course, availability zones protects against downtime due to data center failure because you have physically separated data center within the same region. Each data center is equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking connected through this. So this is because they are connected through fiber optic networks. That's how failover is able to happen. So now the primary Azure resources. All of what we have been discussing so far is about physical data center that Microsoft has built for their Azure. So now, if you now want to provision a resource in Azure, what are the resources you can provision? So the resources you can provision are, of course, virtual machine, example of infrastructure as a service, right? Storage account, virtual network, app services, example of your platform as a service, SQL database, of course, also a platform as a service. Azure Functions, a serverless resource. So a whole lot of other resources that are available, we will explore when we go into the Azure portal. So like I said, one of the fundamental components you have in your Azure is the resource group. And like I said, resource group is just a logical container to arrange your resources. I said, see it as a bookshelf where you just arrange your books. So, you just arrange a shelf and then you put books inside. So the books now are the resources, whether your virtual machine, your storage account, depending on how you want to arrange. So you arrange them into resource groups. So now, how are you able to interact with Azure Data Center? Because you have already said Azure is a cloud service provider, and we told you cloud is delivery of computing resources over the internet, or accessing computing resources and services over the internet. So Azure has built a data center. You are in your room. You want to create a server inside Azure data center. How do you go about it? You either go through Azure portal or you send in some commands. So the commands you can send in can be from PowerShell, Azure PowerShell, or Azure CLI, or you send some API, commands. So basically, this is how it happens. So at the edge of every Azure data center is this Azure Resource Manager that they have. So it is through this Azure Resource Manager that whatever you are asking for through the portal gets translated to an action in the data center. Probably from the portal, you have clicked to create a virtual machine. This Resource Manager is what is listening to the clicks you are making on the portal, and in the end, it actions it out in the data center for you, and then you can have access to a virtual machine. If you are sending in commands from maybe PowerShell or CLI, of course, you have to install a software development kit on your computer that translates these scripting languages into what this resource manager understands, and then it provisions whatever you are looking for. REST API can interact with resource manager. What they're simply, what is simply happening under here is that this resource manager component understands what they call JSON language. JSON standing for JavaScript Object Notation. How servers actually communicate is usually in API standards. So the API standard that the Azure Resource Manager understands is JSON, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. So when you do any action from portal, it gets translated to the JSON equivalent in the backend, and then Resource Manager understands. When you are sending command from a REST API client, you are basically sending a JSON kind of command, and Resource Manager understands. But for PowerShell and CLI, you need a development kit, a software development kit, to translate the script you have written in PowerShell or CLI into JSON equivalent before Resource Manager can understand. During the course of the training, we would explore some of these PowerShell, CLI. Majorly, you will be interacting with Azure environment from the portal, because of course, portal is quite easy. You go into the portal, then you click icons, like as you can see from here. You basically click icons to achieve a task. But in advanced IT environment, having to go and click task means you can only achieve one thing at a time. But if you want to do multiple things at a time, you have to be able to programmatically do that thing. So which means you have to be able to do some scripting. So that's where something like PowerShell or CLI comes in. So we would also have a session in our course of training to explore the fundamentals of basic PowerShell scripting and CLI scripting. So you send in some commands basically, and you control your resources in Azure, or you create new resource, or you even delete an existing resource that you no longer need. So we'll explore some of this. So this is just logically how interacting with Azure Data Center is happening. So for example, I've logged into portal.azure.com. Then I can click to say I want to create a virtual machine, and in Azure Data Center, a virtual machine will be provisioned for me. So how is that happening? So it is with the help of this Azure Resource Manager. This is like a service that Azure has built in their data center that listens to command coming from various sources, whether from the portal, whether from a scripting tool like PowerShell or CLI, whether from a REST API client. Then it understands all of their languages, and then it carries out the action for you in the data center. So yeah, basically when you want to subscribe to Azure, First thing is you need to have a subscription. Subscription or account. You can use them interchangeably. It's either you say a subscription or an account. So for example, okay, let me do a kind of small distinction on the account, because from this picture, they typically say you can have an account with multiple subscriptions on them. So in Azure, once you sign in for the first time, or once you log in into Azure for the first time, Azure creates a tenant or an account in the name of the email you use to sign in. That is how they are able to separate you from other users that they have in their, in their portal, or in their subscription, in their customer base. So the unique email you use to sign in, they will tie it into what they call an account. Now, on top of that account, you can now create multiple subscriptions if you want. So for example, now, in this, I've logged into portal.azure.com. I basically used the email address from our company, which is for foreverj.org. So this is our email. So we have a tenant like this. So with this is how my Azure is able to tell us apart from any other company that also has, services running in Azure. So they basically tie this, our email, our domain, to a tenant or an account in the backend. Then on the account, we can now have subscription. So right now, let me say view account. Now probably, let me see subscription. Clicking. So you can see it says, I do not have permission. Okay, I think, okay, my permission is restricted actually. So here I would have been able to see if I have subscriptions. So if I don't have subscription, it will tell me I don't have subscription. Then if I don't have subscription, I can basically say I want to create a free trial. So you also can do it. Once you type portal.azure.com into your web browser, it takes you to an Azure page asking you to sign in. So once you sign in, it ties that username, I mean the email address you used to sign in, it ties it to an account for you. Then in your account, you can now have subscription, one or multiple, as the case may be. So we do have organizations that have multiple subscriptions. So they might have reasons for having multiple subscriptions. So these are the fundamentals. So you have an account. On your account, you have subscriptions. Then inside your subscriptions, you now have, your resources. So basically, your subscription are like a billing boundary, meaning you have a billing information tied to this subscription. So every resource inside here are being billed from a source. Maybe you connect a credit card here, you connect another one here, you connect another one here. So depending on how you want to manage them, then you can have your resources on all of them. So basically, once you sign into Portal for the first time, they create an account for you based on your email address, based on that domain. Then you can now, go for a subscription that you want. You can have multiple, you can have single subscription. So inside the subscription, you now have to create resource group. Then you can now begin to create resources inside each resource group that you have created. And like I said, resource group is just a logical container to arrange your resources. Like I said, see it more like a bookshelf where you arrange your books. So they want us to walk through Azure Portal and see, how you manage your resources. Of course, you have your management group or your account. On your account, you have subscriptions. Then on each subscriptions, you can now have resources. Your resources, of course, are organized inside resource groups. So, and these are maybe further information about Azure for you. Like in a single directory or account, you can have up to 10,000 management groups. So management groups more like subscriptions. Then, of course, can support up to 6 levels of depth. So you have management group, you have subscription, you have resource group, then you have some resources. So you can apply policies at the level of your, subscriptions or at the level of your management group to control what will be happening in your Azure account. We'll see some of this as we progress in the course of the training. So yeah, they are saying objective, you should understand benefits of virtual machine, app service, and network. Yeah, we'll be, saying some of this as the training commences proper. We'll have a session basically on virtual machines and everything that has to do virtual machines. In there, we'll provision virtual machine. You provision virtual network, you will connect to the virtual machine and play around it. We'll also have a session on Azure App Services. You create an app service platform, you will deploy a sample code into it, and you see a live website during the course of the training, and you play around it. Of course, I think in that same session, we'd have a session on the Kubernetes service. Like I said, Kubernetes service, if it is AKS, it's seen as a platform as a service. Then, of course, we'll provision virtual network. You'll see how to provision virtual network. They are just simple from click, 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 but of course, you will have some control on how you want to design your network. And of course, we'll see some storage, we'll see some databases. Then Azure Marketplace, where you can probably get some softwares you will need. So yeah, for compute services, these are examples of compute services you can have. On-demand computing services that provides, resources you need to run your application, from virtual machine to app service to container instances to Kubernetes. So you see them. So yeah, you already understand what a virtual machine is. So, and like I said, basically, cloud is providing you with virtualized servers where you can now provision virtual machines on top of them, meaning there is an already deployed physical server in a data center, and they have installed a virtualization software on top of it. So there are lots of virtualization software. Microsoft also has theirs, which they call Hyper-V. There are some from other top software companies like VMware. So VMware, they also have a virtualization software. They call it vSphere. There is one from Oracle. I think they call it VirtualBox. So some of these sub companies actually have virtualization softwares. But all virtualization software, what they do is to emulate the physical hardware resources of your server and then allow you to provision multiple virtual machines on top of it, and all of them are sharing the same physical resources, including your processor, your memory, your storage, and your networking. So of course, would create how to create a virtual machine. And then of course, would probably, demonstrate installing a sample application on them, maybe a web server, whatever. So once we go into the training properly, then of course, like I said, we would deploy a web app service in the course of the training. We'll have a session for this where you will deploy an app service, and then you will deploy a sample code into it, maybe from maybe a .NET application, maybe a Python, or maybe a Node.js. We have someone who is going to take you through these Azure App Services. You will see a fully deployed one, and then you have an application to run on it. So of course, we'll show you some of these container instance. Yeah, we'll see it, and of course AKS as well, Azure Kubernetes Service. Virtual desktop, I think virtual desktop is actually not gaining traction again. So we basically don't concentrate on it again because most organizations are no longer using virtual desktop. So virtual desktop is just a way of having, multiple people sharing the same server. Basically, everyone logs into the server and the server gives you your own session based on the user account you used to log in. So everybody will have their own session, but we are all sharing the same server. But then we have our own, our own session hosted differently within the same server. So that's the concept behind the virtual desktop. And of course, we'll explore the networking services. Basically, you would see Azure Virtual Network, we'll deploy it, and like the sound, private network, virtual private network. They allow you to connect to your Azure network from the internet, but having a private, encrypted traffic traveling through the public internet. Basically, when you access the internet, eavesdroppers can be listening to whatever is happening, except your internet service provider put some protection for you. So in case of Azure now I went to portal.azure.com. So anything that I'm doing from here is basically over the public internet because I just have maybe my internet provider. Excuse me. Yeah, I just had to grab some water, please. So how I'm browsing the internet now is basically over the public internet. And then of course, if I'm doing anything sensitive, it means eavesdroppers or hackers can probably, try to trace my activities. So, but in Azure, if you want to prevent something like that, you can actually set up a VPN between your laptop and Azure, such that before you connect to Azure, you probably first turn on a VPN. Once you turn on the VPN, the Azure VPN, then you connect. VPN is like giving you encrypted channel within the public internet to reach your destination, such that your information, as it's traveling through the public internet, it's protected. So I think there'll be, during the training for Azure Network, you see VPN. But Azure Express Route is going to probably be outside the scope of this work, because Express Route actually means you need to lay a physical cable between your organization and Azure data center, whether you are doing it yourself or you have a third party to provide you that service. But of course, Express Route means you even want to go for a more private connection. You want to lay physical fiber connection between yourself and the closest Azure data center to you. So, but of course, it's capital intensive. It means we need to have physical fibers, laid between us. So, of course, to be outside the scope of this training. Even in practice, only a very few organizations can afford to go the route of to go through express route, because of course fibers are expensive. So only big corporations that really need that protection that goes for this option. But of course, VPNs, they are just softwares you can create right from Azure, install a certificate, and then you have encryption happening on your data. So we'll walk through creating a virtual network. Of course, for storage, also Azure has a whole lot of storage options. Normally, you have a storage account. So in the storage account, you can have a container for blob for, I think, block objects. Binary something object. I forgot the full meaning of blob. It's binary something object. So usually unstructured data, whether images, whether video, whether voice, everything can be stored here. Then of course you have a disk storage. Obviously, there is no server without having a disk storage where the operating system of that server is going to sit. Just like your PC, you have a hard disk in your PC where the operating system of your PC is, stored. For example, your drive C. So by the time you check from your file explorer and you check your drive C, you see that by default, you cannot have the whole of your drive C to you. A portion of it is used to store your operating system. So the same way in Azure, exactly like that, have a big storage, of course, like your drive C, where the operating system of your virtual machine is being stored. So then we have Azure Files. This is basically for network file shares. For those, if you have any enterprise experience before, companies do have some file servers where, maybe files that is being used throughout the organization is being stored on the server and people can access it. So in the Azure storage, you can simply have a file share created, and the file share can be mounted as a drive on your PC. So whatever you copy from your computer into that drive would actually appear in the storage account. And if anybody else from your organization also mounts that file share on their own PC, they'll be able to see all of the content. So you can easily share files like that. So we'll also explore this in the course of showing you Azure Storage services available. And of course, talking about the Azure storage now. So Azure has different performance tier for the storage they offer. So they have the hot tier, the cool tier, and the archive tier. So the hot tier is usually for storing data that you access frequently, like maybe your day-to-day operational data. You basically want to provision a hot tier storage account. So with this, there are different pricing attached to each type of storage tier based on the access. So if you provision a hot tier storage account, it's more expensive to store, but accessing the content is cheaper. If you have a cool tier storage account, it's a bit less expensive compared to hot tier, but accessing is now more expensive than accessing in hot tier. Because in hot tier, because you're accessing frequently, so they charge you for your read-write operation, the charge is very little. But storing, they charge you more for the storing. So for cool tier, the charge for storage is less because you don't access it frequently. But the cost of the read-write operation into a cool tier is more than hot because you are not expected to be, accessing all of the time. Then archive tier, so if you want to archive a particular information, so like this is the number of days, typically for an archive tier kind of storage. Of course, the least in terms of cost, but of course the most expensive in terms of accessing the content. So they charge you more for the read operation you do into an archive tier storage, but of course storing, they charge you less compared to these other ones. So then you can switch in between the three types of storage anytime. That flexibility is there. So of course, we walk you through creating a storage account, creating a blog in the course of the training. There is also performance tier. This is only talking about access tier. So we also have performance tier, where we have standard storage and we have premium storage. So I think during the course of the training, would go a little bit deeper into some of these options. And of course, you have databases. Just like for any computing system, they used to have databases for their applications to write. For example, you have an application that takes in user information. For example, Facebook. You simply go there, you sign up, You put in your first name, last name, maybe your biodata, personal information, then it stores somewhere such that the next time you are coming to visit facebook.com, it asks you to sign in. You put your username and password. It goes somewhere to verify if what you have supplied is actually existing. Then if it exists, it returns the page you are supposed to see for you. So there is a database that usually store those kind of structured information. So usually, like we said, for the storage account we saw earlier, you basically store unstructured kind of information. Conceptually, there could be a whole lot of differences when we deep dive into it. As for databases, expectedly, database, you store in structured information. You store in structured information. So, and you have a whole lot of different database services available. So SQL managed instance is also a type of database we'll probably be exploring too during the course of the training. Then of course, create database, query database. Then Azure Marketplace. So like I said, Azure Marketplace is where all of the software services that Microsoft is selling on their platform of Azure is the marketplace. So all of the services you want to, provision at all is listed in Azure Marketplace, and it's also open to third-party providers. For example, if you want to provision a virtual machine, but the operating system you want is Linux. Of course, Microsoft is not the owner of Linux. Linux is an open source operating system. So you can basically, look for any kind of operating system. So there are a lot of other, providers selling operating system on Azure. So for example, let me show you this. So in Azure.com, so of course, in the portal, if you need to search anything, so this first search box is like for the marketplace. So anything at all, you don't even know whether you want to check if it exists or not, just type it in this big search box and it will give you. So this search box is actually for the marketplace. So of course, if you click here, it shows you a directory to all of the Azure services that you basically are going to have. So when you click on maybe all services here, you see all of the services that Azure offers. So they've grouped them into, you have all resources. So you have, of course, you have categories, general, compute, networking, storage, so all kind of solutions that you might want to look for depending on your need or where you work for. So maybe AI related solutions, Internet of Things, mixed reality, security, DevOps. So Microsoft has a specific product for any of them. Then in their marketplace, they have solutions from third-party providers as well. For example, if I need to provision maybe a firewalling solution, but then I don't want maybe Microsoft vendor. I want something like maybe Fortify or maybe Cisco Meraki. So of course, Cisco is a third party, but of course I can search for it here. So it's coming, you can see, I can see a whole lot of Cisco based products here. So this is, you can see they are listed under marketplace. I want to check for another, maybe Fortify. You can see, okay, I think they call it, is it FortiGate or something? Yeah, you can see firewall, FortiGate from the marketplace. So these are third-party solutions. So how this third-party thing work is that they also have partnership with Microsoft or Azure. So if you need to provision anything like this, once you click here, from the backend, the Azure Resource Manager that we showed you the last time contacts their own, data center to say, oh, somebody is requesting for your services. Then they also respond by giving a license, and then you are able to provision that service. So basically, the marketplace has a whole lot of resources you want to check about. Any kind of software you probably need for your IT needs, and you don't know whether it exists, just type it in this big search box, and Azure would give it to you, and you'll be able to provision. Yeah, of course, maybe some of the solutions and Azure solution management tools. So, of course, I think for the sake of fundamental, they just want you to probably see like some of these services exist. But basically, if you are not a professional in some of these IT areas, you might not necessarily need to work with them. For example, if you are not into Internet of Things, you probably don't need to work with IoT. Azure is like an entire IT world of its own. Every IT professional has a role to play in the cloud. So, but for the sake of manageability, you are coming into the cloud needs to at least know the fundamentals to all of these services. You need to understand, okay, this service is available, this is how to provision them. But you might probably not have the skill necessary to manage them. Then you have Azure management tools, like we've seen already, from the portal, from PowerShell, from CLI. Then, of course, any resource you provision, you might want to probably monitor them for performance. Then Azure also offers advisors that can check your resource you are running and tell you why gives you a recommendation of how to do to manage your resources better. Then of course service health. So yeah. Of course, Internet of Things, they also have a solution for it, but I don't think we are covering Internet of Things in the course of our training. Then Azure Synapse Analytics, HT Insight, and Databricks are basically for big data operations. So it's usually going to be useful for people into big data, not necessarily everyone coming into Azure. But the purpose of Azure is just to expose you to all of these services that, okay, we offer all of these services. For machine learning, cognitive services, bot services, of course, if you are not into maybe machine learning and AI, you might not necessarily need to know some of the services, but of course, they are available in Azure. Yeah, serverless computing like Azure Functions and Logic App. I think we should be able to cover Azure Functions in the course of this work. So you can basically create function app that basically only run only when needed. So it will be given infrastructure to run. Once it finishes and exited, infrastructure is withdrawn again. Then of course there is Azure DevOps for the modern software delivery operations and IT ops. We have Azure DevOps, we have GitHub and GitHub Actions. Also, GitHub Actions is just doing the same thing like Azure DevOps, where you can run maybe CI/CD solutions. So yeah, like the IoT is a SaaS solution. You just basically create the IoT central or hub, and then maybe you connect your devices you want to be monitoring to them, and then you can be monitoring. I believe this is only going to be interesting to those into IoT, but of course they are also available. So yeah, big data and analytics tools. You see, yeah, they are just basically touching all of these resources to show you the available, not necessarily that you are an expert in them. So, but of course, usually as a cloud practitioner, you need to at least understand the basic common resources that almost all organizations are using in the cloud. So all organization or almost all organization will use virtual machine. They'll have virtual network, they'll have storage and databases. A lot of them also do have app services. because maybe they are running a web app. So some of these are like the core fundamental, or the core services that could probably be unique across all organizations. But of course, depending on the solution that the organization now offers, they might be maybe those into maybe big data analytics, maybe they're into data science, maybe those into providing multi-connected devices and offering some IoT services. So, and that's how those ones go. So of course, for the management tools, we've talked about the Azure portal, we've seen the portal. Of course, we'll be exploring it more when we'll be provisioning those resources and see how to use the Azure portal. And then of course, we'll have a session to write some basic PowerShell script and Azure CLI. Of course, in a cloud shell or from your local PC. Then of course, we'll see Azure Advisor that can basically provide advice, recommendations on how to best manage your resources in the Azure. Then of course, Azure Resource Manager template is an example of an API client. When we are seeing the way of talking to Azure the other time, we basically saw Portal, CLI, PowerShell, then REST client. So Resource Manager is a kind of API client. So it's basically written in JSON format. So you can also provision resources in Azure using ARM templates. So we probably also cover ARM templating. Then Azure Monitor, of course, we'll cover Azure Monitor, where you see how to monitor, collect my performance indicators on your Azure resources as you run them through the cloud. So of course, we call all of these management tools. You can see every of the management tools talks through the Azure Resource Manager into the actual data center, just like we have seen before. When you click in the portal, what you click is being translated into JSON that Resource Manager understands. The Resource Manager carries out the action for you in the data center. Whether you're sending commands from the PowerShell or CLI, or maybe using ARM template as a REST API, or maybe you even install Azure mobile app, because of course they have a mobile app. You can also maybe start, stop virtual machine, create, delete from mobile app. Everything connects through the resource manager to perform the action for them in the data center. So we'll be exploring most of these in the course of the training. So of course, they want us to create a virtual machine with ARM template. Of course, we will create with Portal. We would probably create with PowerShell and CLI as well. Course of the training. We install the PowerShell module locally on your PC to be able to run the commands. The same thing for the CLI. So of course, then we'll see, of course, Azure Advisor. It will be giving you some. So some of these are already pre-built solutions, such that if you create a resource, this Azure Advisor is automatically provisioned alongside, and then you can collect advisory information from it on how to best manage your infrastructure. The same thing for Azure Monitor. You can easily activate it on any of your resources, and then you collect performance indicators on your services, and based on the performance indications you get, you want to probably innovate on your resources. Of course, you also monitor the health of your services. We'll see where most of these resources comes into play as we progress through the course of the training. So maybe let me give a pause here. If you have a question, you can ask. Any questions so far? Hello, guys.
Here.
Any questions? Jesse, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just saying it's overloaded a little bit.
Like it's kind of overwhelming, right? Too much information.
Yeah, I wouldn't say overwhelming, it's a lot.
Okay, well, I guess it will be making more sense when we practically go into hands-on and then we are deploying some of these resources one by one. Then, of course, it will make more sense and you will enjoy it more by then. But of course, usually this introductory session is just to get you familiar with Azure data center, then the resources available therein that you can provision, and of course, yeah, the basics of all of them are. So I guess that's the scope of this today's session. So obviously, from next session onward, we'll be doing some hands-on, and then you would enjoy them more because you have to be, playing around things with your own hands, and then it becomes even more interactive. Jack, any comment from you? Me?
I'm just taking it all in, honestly.
I
Are you
mean,
going to give us those notes?
yeah, I can give you the note. Obviously, I can upload the note for you. Sometimes if you're taking it all in, but then, the information looks like maybe your further mathematics, and it's not even clear at all. I mean, I hope some of this information are making sense, right?
It makes sense.
Okay,
It makes a lot of sense.
thank you. I think maybe don't let me, load you with too much of the information as far as the basics is concerned. It will, like I said, it will get more interesting when we are having the hands-on sessions. So of course, we'll have my other colleagues will probably, start from next week. Those who will show you the Azure administration part, how you manage, users, how you create account users into your account. And then, of course, another colleague will come around, show you how to create virtual machine, virtual network, and how you manage them. Would have another colleague who will come and show you how to create Azure Web App Services, Azure Kubernetes Services, and managing them. Then, of course, another colleague will come and show you how to do backups, because, of course, for some of these resources you are provisioning, you might probably need to do backup in case of disaster. So you have to do backup and recovery. And then, of course, monitoring some of these servers when they are running to monitor their performance. So someone will come and take you through that. And then, of course, management tools, where we'll see using PowerShell, and maybe ARM template. So I guess by then it will be more interesting when you are, doing these actions actually. So yeah, I know sometimes theory might be boring, but of course, when we get into the hands-on, it makes more sense and would enjoy it more by then. So I would ask from the training coordinator if they might probably ask you to sign up for a free Azure account. A free subscription. Normally, sometimes we do have our own subscription, but of course, so that you can practice on your own after each session, you would probably want to sign up for a free subscription. You probably want to sign up for a free subscription. Then once you sign up for a free subscription, then whatever you are shown in the class, you'd be able to go and practice on your own or demo on your own. So basically, you can go to portal.azure.com, sign in with whatever email you want to use to sign in. Then you can start an Azure free trial where they give you $200 credit. Basically, you will need to put in your credit card information. Of course, they are not charging you, but when your 200 credit expires, or maybe at the end of 1 year, they will send you an email to alert you whether they should switch to billing you from your card or not. But of course, for signing up, you definitely need to put your card information. So you can basically do that ahead of the next class. So you just sign up, have a free trial account already, Azure will definitely credit your account, your Azure account, with a $200 credit that you can use to provision resources, such that during the course of the training, while they are provisioning, you can also be, creating those resources and, seeing how to, manage them. So I guess maybe we could, put a stop to it here tonight, because if we continue to go on and on, it will be a whole lot of information, and maybe we'll make so much sense of it. But of course, from the next class, we would start some hands-on, which would make it much more interesting and, of course, something you want to practice on your own in the end. So before probably we round up, maybe we should have some other discussions, outside the core of Azure. Sometimes we do have maybe different goals for, venturing into something. So may I probably ask, what are your motivations? Or probably what are your goals for wanting to go into Azure? So maybe, Jesse, you can say something.
Yeah, for me, it's learning a different aspect of IT, and then also, so like I said, I have my own cloud services, so it'll be nice to know how to work it and utilize Azure and all
Well,
that.
what service did you say you have? That part is
No,
not clear to me.
yeah, so right now, I used to have a NAS Synology set up, and I don't know the
Like,
base.
you have maybe, you do some kind of business on your own, and you're trying to put it on the internet, like to have more users.
Not at all. I just, well, for me, I got it not knowing the scope of how cloud works. So I purchased the Synology because I thought I would be able to have my clients be able to access the data from anywhere really. And but again, yeah, I have no clue. So that's the kind of what this is for me as well. Is also to be able to not only transition to that aspect of IT, but also be able to use it for my own personal gains.
Yeah, I think basically from what you said, whether you are probably not really seeking to be an Azure professional like that, maybe you want to be able to use it for your own self. Yeah, I think cloud encompass all of this, because I could actually remember I have supported a client. He basically has a school, and then he probably have a portal for the school. So he basically has a WordPress website, and then he wanted to host it on Azure. So we just basically provisioned a virtual machine. We install the WordPress, and then he's able to sign in into his WordPress account, and then he has his website live. So if probably it's something like that you think you want to be able to do, yeah, because sometimes people who don't have the skill themselves would have to outsource that to people. So you will have probably to outsource it to maybe someone with the Azure knowledge to manage, whatever you want to put out there to run on the internet for you. So, but of course, if you have the skill yourself, then yeah, you will be able to, do some of these things by yourself. And if you probably wish to take a career in the cloud, yeah, a whole lot of, career options in the cloud. Like, so, but of course, the starting point is usually getting to know the fundamentals of cloud. And believe me, once you understand one cloud properly, all other cloud render similar services. For example, I'm not a specialist in AWS, but because of my knowledge in Azure, I'm able to easily grab AWS, because Azure provides services like infrastructure as a service. AWS also do the same. They might only call it different name. Azure provide platform as a service. AWS also do the same. They just call it different names. So I'm able to relate with AWS easily as well, and as well as Google. So once you have a good understanding of cloud computing from the perspective of a specific cloud provider, you will be able to easily relate with any other cloud provider you probably happen to work with, because they all offer similar services. They only probably target different names, of course, because they are different companies. So the cloud space, like I said, a whole lot of career. Like fundamentally, if we are talking about the Azure, you have maybe Azure administrator at the bottom of every other career options. Like at least you need to be able to provision some of these resources, manage them, and troubleshoot in case of problems happening to any of these resources. So Azure administrator is a whole lot career on its own. Then we can basically have those who are Azure network engineers. I mean, usually it's going to be easier for someone who has networking experience before, in the traditional IT settings. So they can easily, focus more on designing networks on Azure, and they can become Azure network engineer. So of course, there can be Azure data engineer. If someone has some experience with data engineering in the traditional IT already, maybe you are an SQL expert, you can easily transition into Azure data engineer and use some of these big data engineering resources to do your data innovations that you know how to do. There is also security in the cloud as well. So you have to understand maybe identity management, permission, authentication, and then of course, one of the most popular one, DevOps, deploying application into the cloud, provisioning resources. You also have to know how to do that. It's also a career that you can want to probably venture into. And a whole lot of other career options in the cloud. But at the fundamental of every of these other career is at least an Azure administrator experience. You are able to manage Azure resources, provision them, control access, who can do what in an Azure subscription or an Azure account. So this gives you a wide scope of wherever you want to now, push yourself into. Even at the level of an Azure administrator, if you probably think you want to, stand alone and, sell Azure services to some other smaller companies, I've seen people do that. Like they basically, go to smaller companies and say, you know what, I would help you provision and manage your Azure subscription so you can have your servers running in Azure. So you go purchase a subscription from Microsoft, and they tap from your subscription. So you create smaller subscriptions for them on your subscription. So we call something CSP account. Like you can have cloud service provider subscription in Azure, where you become a reseller of Azure account, Azure subscriptions to some other, maybe medium, small companies. So a whole lot of things happening there. So yeah, I think it's really, really a good decision to, want to see what is happening before you even probably say, okay, this is where I'm settling in, or this is where I'm, looking forward to exploring them more. Jack, can we hear from you? What do you think? What's your motivation or your own expectation from venturing into Azure? Or cloud, let's say.
Wow, good question. Can you ask me that my next class?
And the next class,
hmm
you've not thought about it before now?
I mean, I'm still taking it all in, honestly. It's a lot. I like it though. I feel like I still need more knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Of course, you need more knowledge. I'm just, like checking, from the background, like, oh, something motivates you to want to, or to join this class. Or,
I think it was mostly just like me changing careers and going to like I see other people around me in IT and I see how much they enjoy it, and then learning a little bit here and there from them. And I think that's what's kind of motivated me the most.
Okay, yeah, I think interesting to know. Yeah, of course, sometimes, venturing into something else could be from what you hear from people, and you also want to, put your hands there and see how how far you can go with it. So
And plus,
I okay,
and
you
plus
want to say
also
something?
like knowing that like so much is in like I didn't know how much was like how much I use different systems or like different websites, different things, like just knowing like where it come from, like where it streams from. So that's like what interests me too a lot.
I think I mean in your own case, I mean there'll still really be a kind of a discussion more into the
Mhm.
fundamentals of IT because of course cloud computing is just one aspect of IT. Of
Mhm.
course, I mean, there is also the developer, I mean, developing part where you probably become, you want to learn maybe some programming languages, you want to, develop websites and the likes, IT is quite kind of wide actually. But of course, I mean, starting in the cloud too is going to probably give you a sweet experience because the future of IT, like they say, is in the cloud. So because every innovation happening now is, happening in the cloud because people are, shifting away from the traditional IT systems and, focusing in the cloud, which probably means, yeah, I believe your decision is a good one, and I really hope you make the best out of it and you enjoy whatever you set out to explore beyond the scope of this class.